Right, welcome everyone to a bit of a special episode. This is episode 50 and pretty much marks as being 1 year in existence. Now in terms of specifically 1 year, we don't know where we'd actually be going from. If we check back to where it actually started, I think the first episode we uploaded to YouTube was on the 25th of June. And because I wasn't able to figure out how to actually get it onto any podcast platforms, we're another month, it was the 25th of July before we got onto a podcast platform. We host it through Anchor, and that for us puts it up on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Republic, and the majority of platforms. Not Acast, as I discovered during the week when someone got onto me saying, I can't find this anywhere in Acast. It's like, oh yeah, it's not up there, sorry. So we ended up putting up 5, if not 6 episodes. I think the same day, episodes 1 to 5, and we have tried where possible to go weekly since then for the past year, hence bring us up to episode 50. And the plan is to do a bit of a review of the year, stuff we've learned, a bit about podcasting, but mainly about interesting stuff we have learned from guests over the years, because ultimately that was one of the main reasons we set it up, was to have a good excuse to talk to far more intelligent people than us, ask them loads of questions so we can learn stuff. But by doing it through a podcast, put it out to other people, it's a good license to do so. Damien, from a year of podcasting, not now specific to guests and stuff, but what have you learned?
I think the big thing that I picked up about myself was just how nervous I was speaking at the beginning, and for anyone who does happen to know me, trying to get me to shut up is a task. It's an impressive task if you can manage it. But I remember listening back to the first few episodes and realizing, whoa, like it was a real struggle to listen to me. Well, I found it because there was just a lot of nerves that I could tell. Maybe others couldn't, but I remember coming into episodes going like, okay, right, I have to get myself right for this. But you get a little bit more used to it, which, I suppose that's been one of the biggest things for me personally. On top of that, then it would be just, I suppose, focusing in questions to our guests, and maybe picking up and going off on tangents and enjoying the way where a conversation can go on some pretty in-depth topics. I found that to be pretty interesting over the last year, and we've had some fantastic guests. And while we might have had a plan going into many of those episodes, there's a lot of them that you'd look at the plan afterwards and compare them to the episode, and you're like, whoa, well, we barely touched on that. We had like the intro, and that was it, and which was brilliant because we were, you can overplan things too. But yeah, I know it's just, for me, it's just been getting used to recording, acknowledging that I have a double chin, for all the video recordings, and that's kind of been it for me.
I've really enjoyed editing. Damien talks about 40 minutes, and only 15 of it goes out in the actual podcast each week. Shane, what about you?
I'm, to be honest, a little bit proud of us for actually consistently putting something out week by week, considering this podcast was first formed at the back of a bus on the way to the airport in Chester in 2017, and we didn't pull the trigger on it until 2020, but since then we've actually consistently managed to put something out. So that was not expected, to be perfectly honest.
Funnily enough, it's 2017 since the three of us were actually together.
Yeah.
Only for Zoom and lockdown, actually, when we started chatting, then we said we should maybe start recording these and getting a few people on to talk.
Get the band back together.
What I was going to say then was the actual name. This is a question we get an awful lot, particularly when we get a guest on. There's usually, it's not the more enjoyable bits, is the 15 or so minutes of chat at the start and chat at the end. But a lot of people are like, the name, did you spell the followers wrong or something, or where did that come from? So essentially we met doing our masters, exercise and nutrition science at the University of Chester, most of it delivered in Dublin. But our first lecturer, he wasn't head of the course, but he pretty much was. He was a bit of a chief that way. But Professor Steve Fallows, he was your classic academic. I remember him saying to us, I don't deal with undergrads, I can't manage speaking to all those. But we just kind of created a bit of a persona around him, that he was the Van Wilder of the University of Chester campus. And we set up a WhatsApp group called Steve Fallows Fans. And the whole thing was just kind of a tribute to him, because even if you look at whenever we don't have a guest on, even like the art of the episode itself is I just got a picture of him online and created a Bitmoji of him and have him eating a feed of pancakes when it's how to carb up or how to get aerobically fit. It's him running on a treadmill just through the Bitmoji app on my phone. And so we were torn between drowning in the fallows or the followers, and thankfully the followers rolls a little bit easier off the tongue.
I like the idea people think that we're so stubborn that they think we just misspelled followers and just stuck with it this time just out of pure grit.
So for episode 100, we have promised ourselves that we're going to get him on. He will be the guest for that episode. How good he is at using Zoom or like some elements of technology in general, not entirely certain. But
we may have to go visit him. Bring the podcast on the road.
Shane leaves out Dublin to go to Chester. He won't.
I will. I'll leave for Steve. I won't leave for anyone else.
So then just looking back at like various guests and stuff that way, what are some of the things even that you would have learned quite a bit about? I know for me, I think one of the big, I always kind of saw it as a bit of a turning point was when we got Steve Casey on, because we went from averaging, and at the start it wasn't great, about 30 listeners. When Steve came on, it jumped because he just, he'd have a decent following, he promoted himself, it jumped to about 120. And has since increased to 300 plus for the majority of episodes since. But I always felt that was one that where we learned a good bit about ourselves that day, and that like we were able to get in depth on a lot of stuff. What like do you find or stuff? Yes, this is what I'll definitely include there. This is what I'll get benefits from. And then if I was to get a bit more time, I'd start adding this in.
Yeah, well, obviously I do top speed work with them. Because most of the time when you go in with teams, as we all know, I'm sure that we do speed work all the time, and then when you actually break it down, they're not doing speed work. What they're doing is speed endurance work, and so saying, okay, that needs to be changed. So from a bulletproof standpoint and things like that, we definitely do the speed work and we do the races. It's different for every team. I mean, if I was sitting down, I talk to people about what would the difference be between, let's say, Cork and a club team. When you're with Cork, like you have the best midfielder, you have the best defender, you have the best goalie, you have the best all these positions they're the best at. So that's why they're here. They're the best in the county at them. When you're with a club team, you don't have that. You don't have that. You might have a player who strives to play into county, and you have another fella who just loves hanging around with his buddies. Saying, okay, well, do we need to spend way more time playing the game? Do I need to do these 20 minutes? Can we, like when people talk about squat mechanics with young kids, I'd say, well, I'll introduce that as part of the warm-up. I don't want that isolated so that lads are standing around for 10 minutes. We'll put in squat mechanics part of the warm-up. We'll put in running drills part of the warm-up. At least they're doing it often. If I was to do things, it depends on the underage section. Like, I mean, I started with the Blackrock Miners a couple of weeks back, and we're doing 1x20 now. So that's probably not something I'd have done in the past. So I really like it. It's hard to get buy-in from the players, but while the gyms were locked down, they didn't have a choice anyway. So we did 1x20. Could I sell that to a senior team? It'd be hard. If I was to do volume training with them and I suggested 1x20, I think that'd be a hard sell. But I just like the premise behind it. I like the idea that you can get 20 odd exercises done in one session. You only do one set. And obviously the benefits in terms of capillary density and mitochondrial density, and obviously getting exposed to not as high in intensity as it would be if you were doing, let's say, 3x10 on a back squat. Now, if you talk to players, they'll probably tell you what they want anyway. They might say they need to be fitter. I'd look at resting heart rates straight away and say, okay, well, look at resting heart rates, and for the next 4 weeks, we might determine what fitness level needs to be improved.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have any ranges on resting heart rate that you're generally looking for?
I'd love to have lads in around the high 40s. Just every time you do a test, the next question is, what should I be getting? And you're there going, well, where are you now, and how much can we improve you? So obviously, if you have a resting heart rate of 70, the room for improvement is huge. Somebody comes up with a resting heart rate of Lance Armstrong had his resting heart rate somewhere around the low 30s with his vitamins and minerals, but so like, I mean, I'd like team sport athletes to be around the high 40s, low 50s, just because again, people put too much value on the high intensity work. Make everything high intensity, that'll change things, and the low intensity work kind of gets forgotten about. But the low intensity work, if it's done properly, will determine how well you recover from the high intensity work and how well you can do the high intensity work. So like if I got a phone call from a team and they said, can we get you in for 6 weeks, I'd probably refuse it, because what would happen is you're forced to do high intensity.
He was obviously well able to go in depth because he's an incredibly knowledgeable man. And I feel in a way we respected ourselves a little bit more after that. And I always feel that episode, I think it was just around Christmas or it came out just afterwards, that kind of, I don't know, made us grow up a little bit through the podcast or have a bit more belief in it. What were any kind of big points for yourselves?
Yeah, on that, I think it's like there's still an awful lot for us to learn about running a podcast, but simple little things or something can spark it and like double your listenership overnight and stuff that you just don't see coming. And maybe it's us not knowing enough about the platform, maybe it's us not knowing what we're doing with release dates, social media, etc., etc. I'm sure we have a lot to learn, but it's crazy that one thing can change so much for it. Or even like that, some episodes you'd be like, I don't know how this will do, and it'll explode. And then some you're like, geez, this is really good content, I can't wait for this one to release. And it'll be slow out of the blocks or it just won't come off. And it's so hard to predict because we like something as a team, it doesn't mean that, because again, obviously the listeners probably don't know this, but like the conversations go on a lot longer pre-edited, and it might even, like, we're obviously going to try and keep the best bits, but it might just not flow as well, or kind of it might have seemed different in the moment than it actually does on recording. So it's really cool. It's interesting to see kind of how the stuff works from a behind the scenes aspect as well.
One of the things I was very fond of over the past year or so of recording was feedback and constructive kind of criticism that might have come our way just maybe on how we were presenting, or I think, Murph, one of the things one of the compliments that has to go to you massively is the production kind of quality that's being appreciated by so many, and that took like time and effort to figure that out. There are plenty of podcasts out there. The dog in the street nearly has a podcast at this stage, but it's definitely been very positive.
And a coffee truck.
And a horse box. Imagine seeing a horse inside in a coffee shop. But yeah, I think I've really enjoyed the feedback and us actually consistently taking different bits of feedback on board and applying that to how we've gone about things has been huge. Whether it's from guests that we've had on or actual listeners, it's been great. But yeah, like Shane said, we certainly have a long way to go when it comes to figuring out the bits around social media with it. But yeah, that's
it's great to see. It's great to get feedback from people in the industry as well. Like, I'm sure you lads will be the same, but there's people who are like way better coaches than me, way better coaches than us, and like kind of will be much higher in the industry, and they're either promoting us or giving us shout outs on different platforms, or even just messaging directly being like, hey guys, great work, keep doing what you're doing. And it's just really cool. Like, I know it's not the same thing as getting like a shout out for a celebrity or something, but it's people who are the pinnacle of your industry acknowledging you or seeing what you're doing in the space and kind of giving you credit for it, which is really cool.
You'd respect that, or I don't know it's proud the word, but you'd appreciate that an awful lot more than a celebrity or whatever, someone who you respect. I think that means an awful lot more to you than just some big name who says, "Oh, good podcast there, lads, well done."
I mean, we don't even care when Drake shouts us out anymore. It's just SNC industry people.
Into something I was very conscious of at the start was the audio quality, because I listen to an awful lot of podcasts, have done for 8 or 9 years now, and you do notice it sometimes when you're listening and the quality, like audio quality, isn't great. And even when it's good info, sometimes you'll toughen through, be like, oh no, I just really want to hear what they have to say. But I think anymore it's gotten so much harder to actually sit through poor audio quality now. So I listened back to some of the first one there this morning. I was like, oh geez, that's awful. Like, how do we let that go out there? And it was just a case of we didn't really know what we were doing. I was conscious as well of editing time. How much does actually need to go in to make it worthwhile? Like, if it was taking 8 hours to edit something every week, it's not feasible to continue long term. So just trying to cut that workflow down as much as possible. I think the biggest difference there has been, so say we're having this conversation on Zoom, and Zoom records the audio, obviously enough, everyone knows that, but it sounds like you're trapped in an empty Coke can, or you're underwater. If you've Bluetooth, if you've AirPods and you record that, it sounds like you're underwater. Otherwise it just sounds like you're inside an empty Coke can. So the big thing that's made a difference for us is we all record our audio separately. So I'm talking into a mic, which is recording on QuickTime on my laptop. Damien generally leaves his phone down, but we're trying it out today. He's also going through QuickTime there, just through his earphones. And Shane has a mic that connects into his phone. And when we get a guest on, we generally just get him to leave their phone down and hit record. And then we have 4 separate audio files together. You just mute, like say, when I'm talking, I just mute out the other 3. But we still use Zoom. And we found, just for having the consistency so that we're all the same volume, but just the clarity and quality of it, it makes it so much better. It's a little bit extra work, but I just think long term it makes it so much clearer and just easier to listen to and more consistent like throughout the whole thing. And like obviously we had issues with that. My mic went a bit dodgy there a couple of times. Damien recording in a group of people a few times picked up a bit of background audio. Shane changing from no headphones to wearing headphones, stopped picking up a lot of background or feedback and stuff as well. But you know, it's all part of that learning curve. I had a call with a sound engineer about 6 or 10 episodes in, and that cleared up an awful lot for me as well, just to figure stuff like that out.
No, that's and credit where credit's due on all that. So there is a little bit, just for anyone who is, you know, listening in and looking to kind of push on their own, you know, it's great. But I suppose other sides of then just recording over the last year that have been huge for me is that there's been a considerable amount of maybe confirmation bias from speaking to, you know, for myself anyway, where, you know, like Shane mentioned, we've had coaches who are far more knowledgeable, far more experienced, far more maybe accredited or have achieved quite a bit in their careers than us. So we're very much here having conversations with them, but learning as well at the same time. But one of the big things for, say, young coaches, I guess, is trying to figure out if what you're doing is right, or if it makes sense, or if you're along the right path. So for me, that's been a huge part of the last year. But that, and I suppose what I'm trying to get from that is to encourage any coaches who are listening here to, you know, to really, you know, I suppose diversify where you're getting your information from, you know, actually listen to people, speak to coaches. You know, if you're going to any event, if you're going to, you know, games or anything like that, you know, and you know there's other coaches there who maybe, you know, might be much further down the line than you, to actually go and speak to them, because coaches are more than happy to, in my experience anyway, to chat to you and answer kind of any questions that you have. At least that's been my experience. That's one side of it. And the other side has been the amount that I've actually learnt as well from, you know, even there. One of the episodes for me that really stands out massively would be the roundtable with Brona, Emma, and Sarah, and just the amount that I actually picked up there on, I suppose, just some of the reasons or background to maybe girls' physical activity, their activity levels, or their involvement in sport, when and why they may potentially drop out of sport and physical activity. A lot of stuff that I would just have no actual knowledge of or understanding of. So there was a huge that for me was a great example of an episode where I shut up, which meant that Murph had to do hardly any editing because I wasn't speaking. It was fantastic. It was just a huge amount of knowledge and, you know, research, experience, and understanding there, which I picked up a ton from that.
Brona made an excellent point that day. I'll actually drop it in here now, around how, in ways, females need to be really conscious of respecting themselves enough to be critical of poor performances and that. I thought that was something that really jumped out with me that day.
I think even, like, it strikes me in Ireland with female sport, we kind of tiptoe around females sometimes. And it struck me, I was watching one of the Irish women's soccer matches recently, and like, they didn't play great, if you're being honest. But after it, like, they kind of threw the game away. And after it, the commentators were like, oh, you know, they can be proud of that performance, you know, because they're girls almost. And I know I'm probably being sensitive around it, but it really struck me. Like, I don't know if you watched any of the Aussie Rules women's, the AFLW, because they just, like, they don't hold back on the women. But if we want to be treated as equal, like they almost give them that respect of saying they've a terrible game and, you know, she's not at the races today and that type of thing. And if you're playing elite sport, you want to be treated like that. Like, don't patronise them either. And I think we probably do that a little bit with female sport in Ireland. It's like almost, oh, aren't we doing great? Lidl are great for ladies football. But like, that's one sport. You know, and even today, like, I was on my phone trying to watch Phil Healy, like, who qualified in the European Championship. You know, and you're just going, like, there's no word about this. And we should be glad because RT Player have it on the player, but it should be on TV. And we're okay with that. You know, we tend to take the small wins a little bit too often, I think.
Shane, was there a case where you learned something new that you weren't aware of at all beforehand?
I think it'd be more along the same lines as Damien said. Like, it's nice to have people kind of confirm what you've been doing, or kind of you're dealing with someone who's the next step above you. You kind of assume, okay, well, maybe they're doing something that I've never even heard of, or B, it's just a step up from what I'm doing because it's at that next level. But a lot of the time it's just doing those basics really, really well and really, really often, which is good to hear that people are doing that at an elite level. And also what I found really cool was, like, pretty much 90% of the episodes we've done have kind of had a red thread of how important communication is for a coach. So regardless of what aspect, what sport, what discipline you're coaching, even people we've had on who are more focused on teaching, it's just that being able to be an effective communicator is so important as a coach, and just being able to relate to the people you're coaching with. So you don't have to be roaring and shouting at them. You don't have to be their best friend. You can have any personality type you want once you're able to get your point across, and once your clients or athletes trust you. It's such an important factor of coaching. And we can talk about the ins and outs of sports science all we want. If you can't communicate effectively with your client or with your athlete,
couldn't agree more. And like, that kind of all comes back to the buy-in element, and that's where I suppose at the start of when I am working with a new team, I'm always looking for the influencers and the key lads within the panel to, if I can get buy-in from them, like, you're onto a winner. And like, simple things like someone can't touch their toes and you can make a change on that in a couple of minutes. Like, it's very, very easy. It's simple. Like, it could be anything, but if you win over their trust for the most part when you're working new with a team, it's so vital, and they're the key things that I would be trying to do. But again, as you said, minimal changes for different types of lads, and they just appreciate that. Like, you know, it's just, you know, that's what they expect, I suppose.
It's almost irrelevant how much you know.
Was there any stage, and we'll look at a few highlights again in a few minutes, but was there anything that happened where you're like, it happened to me twice anyway, and I didn't agree with him, and I just kind of sat on it. I suppose a bit earlier in it all, I was like, oh, I don't want to be too rowdy here, cause a disagreement or anything. But internally I was like, no, I don't agree with what you were saying there, but I never actually said it. I'm kind of like, you know, I let myself down a bit there by not saying it.
So there's nothing coming to mind. There probably were a few things, you know, that maybe I didn't agree with 100%, but there's nothing really coming to mind. But I think the big thing there is, like, again, growing into a confidence in yourself with what we're doing. You know, maybe if you were in conversation with somebody one-on-one and you weren't recording to release it, you might, you know, approach it a little bit differently. But maybe there is that slight kind of you know, question mark there in your head, like, oh, do I really want to really dig in here? But there's nothing comes to mind. How about you, Shane?
I think it happened to me once, but it was more, they kind of said it, and then, you know, when you're trying to work it out in your head, it's like, maybe I just heard it wrong. And then I was kind of like trying to figure it out in my head, and then by the time I actually conceived, I was like, no, I do disagree with this. The conversation moved on to something else. So I didn't say anything.
What was it?
Oh, I'm not going to say that. Not live on air.
No, I'm going to say it too.
Good.
Billy Denny, he said it at the start of his on, because we just asked him, you know, he was a week away from playing an All-Ireland minor final with Kerry and signed for Sunderland, and we just said, you know, did playing a few different sports, was that important for you being a good soccer player? I said, oh yeah, definitely. Like, I was way stronger on the ball, and, you know, loads of things that came from playing other sports. And then when it came to, like, and the lads now who are with the Kerry underage squads, are they playing much else? I don't really know, don't ask. But to be honest, like, we train 4 nights a week, and if they're not there at the training the 4 nights because they're playing other sports, it's letting me know that they're not fully committed to it. So it kind of felt like he said at the start himself, playing other sports is a big benefit, but then wasn't really that in support of him playing other stuff at kind of 14, 15. I was like, oh, not really sure. That's like, was a bit of a contradiction or whatever there. The other one was, I think it was, I didn't even notice at the time, but when I listened back, Brian Hickey had said how when females are in prep and many would lose their period, you know, it might be gone for 3 months, then it'll come back once, which is, you know, and then they could go again for a while. And I was like, surely only come back once isn't enough. Like, surely you need to look to be getting it back for much, much, much longer than that, and minimise where possible it going, if not letting it go at all. And I felt it was a little bit, oh, is that really okay? And I don't know, I kind of wish I'd not challenge him up, but just dug a bit deeper to be like, really, is that okay? And then not asking Kelly about it when we had her on, it was probably a bit of a mistake then as well, and not following up a bit deeper on it there.
It's actually probably something, with with Brian's episode, that just on that point, it is something we probably should have quizzed a little bit more, because it's something that I've noticed with clients and friends and people I know, that a lot of girls don't question it at all and will go regularly. Sometimes it can be like a badge of honor. More times it can just be like, oh, that's just the way I am, and might not have a period for 6, 7, 8 months, and they kind of think like, oh, well, that's grand, you know. And it is important to, I suppose, to highlight maybe some of the issues that could be around that when they do pop up for us. But that's actually a great point, Murph, that I forgot about. And I think was there one popped up, maybe I'm wrong, with Carl Dillon. He mentioned something similar about playing other sports. That was it maybe by the age of 16 or something like that, you might want to start looking down, your football line as well. Is there?
I think it was something that like, oh, in Kerry, it doesn't matter how good you are at anything else because you're always just going to go and play football. Whereas it was like,
yeah,
oh, I'd say if you're talented enough to represent your country in something, you probably will move a little bit away from football, or some will anyway.
Yeah, no, it just kind of struck me like, so you've Billy's episode there on the soccer side, you've Carl's on the GA side, and often coaches can get very much caught up in what their own sport is and see that as the focus, the predominant one that everyone else should see, the importance in. But I think the wider picture, especially when you're dealing with teenage athletes, that wider picture does need to be kind of taken into account a little bit more.
Any other big highlights then, or kind of guests you put on here? Like, I know you mentioned there around the round table and stuff, but I know the day we had Kelly on talking about the menstrual cycle and how that impacts performance. That was something I knew so little about, and it's something that so few people know a bit about because it's just not spoken of. It's massively under researched, but I think for female sport in particular, it is something that a greater understanding of would make a huge difference. Any other bits like that jumped out at you, Shane, there?
It's a lot of, I suppose, on a personal level, I quite liked we had a lot of golf content on, just because I feel like if you see any golf exercises or stuff on TV or in mainstream media, it's usually somebody like arsing around with a band or just twirling the club above their head trying to like loosen up and get flexible for golf. But whereas everyone we had on was very much geared towards like, no, you should be doing resistance training. You're not gonna, it's very much, you'll probably have a better understanding of this, Damien. Like for years, basketball players would have been the same. Like they'd never be in a gym or resistance because they'd be like, no, it'll make me too slow. It'll take away my pace. It'll take away everything. And I feel golf is in that kind of area now because there's people like Bryson, people like McIlroy who are just absolute units of men hitting the ball miles, and like it's not hindering them in any way. So it's good to see coaches kind of in the industry really powering through with the benefits of resistance training. Like especially Mike's been brilliant in it, and even if you follow him on Twitter, like he's excellent. There's so much free content around golf, and it's all like you could just change the name for a lot of it to a bodybuilding account or a resistance training account, and you wouldn't really notice a huge amount of difference. Obviously around, if you take away all the golf specific stuff like videos and things like that, all the areas would be general fitness, general health tips and guidelines, rather than anything being super like you have to be swinging with weighted clubs or anything like that, which I think is really cool.
It was interesting that Mike and Robbie, both slightly different approaches, but both obviously successful. That Mike was very much compound lifts, let's get them as good as possible, hip internal rotation, and then thoracic mobility, where it's kind of big rocks, whereas Robbie was that bit more focused on the rotation based stuff and you know, the rotation around your core and even the stability through your core, whereas Mike didn't touch as much on that. He was kind of letting the golf actually do that for him. So you know, I thought it was interesting to see different approaches.
I definitely think I'd be more on Mike's side of things, or in that more of that camp, that you need that process, because again, swing can change. Like, nobody's swing is going to be the exact same. Like, maybe you don't need as much rotation because you have much more of a shoulder swing, things like that. But I think getting that core, those big lifts as your big rocks, you're not going to be too far away from a great end result.
Actually, a fairly common theme across an awful lot of sports. That just, you could probably pick 5 exercises and they would apply to 90% of athletes, regardless of the sport. They're like the same gym program, well, not the exact same, but you know, kind of a 4 to 6 week and a couple of progressions and slight alterations that over the course of a year would benefit 90% of sports. Realistically, it would. And that was kind of one of the big learns. You know, talking to Orla, who came from a camogie background and worked with hockey and rugby.
Yeah, I think you definitely do need a knowledge of the sport. Like, don't get me wrong, I came into rugby and into hockey with zero knowledge. So I learned it as I went. Like, when I went over to New Zealand first, like, I think if I look back, I'd laugh at the little knowledge I had of rugby. And I think they knew it as soon as I arrived. And it was the first thing I said in my interview. I was like, I know you have to throw it backwards. After that, I know nothing. I learned a lot about the sport as I went, and I think you have to come in with the knowledge of physical prep, and you have to come in with the knowledge of, okay, sport, field sport. You've got some understanding of, you know, what the demands of a game might be. Yes, the rules and how it's played and whatnot will change the you know, specifics of what you do, but you do have to have that base knowledge, and that'll always stay the same no matter what sport you're in or where you go with it. And then, yeah, definitely the real detail within the sports is going to have an effect on, you know, the real specifics when you get into that sport specific prep, or as you get closer to competition. Definitely
they're still looking at developing the same areas. Mike with golf, Paul a couple of weeks ago with swimming as well, and then, you know, you both work in rugby, I work largely in GA. That it's not that different. Realistically, it's not. And I think on the sports is actually catching up to that at the minute is soccer, that they're starting to realise more and more that, you know, focus on the basics here probably is going to give us the majority of our benefits, as opposed to trying to make up slightly. Oh, here, soccer's so big, you can't lump all SSE coaches together there at all. But you would have, or definitely it was publicised more, the slightly different stuff. Probably because, like, you know, going to the gym and doing 4 sets of 6 squats, you know, there's nothing crazy about that. It's not going to make a highlights reel of anything, whereas the majority of good coaches is probably what in or around are doing.
It's the same kind of principle as, like, we'd see as nutrition coaches. Like, you're getting your general nutrition, hitting your macros is going to do 90% of the work, but everyone jumps immediately to supplements. That's the same with people going, oh, well, I need to get the sport specific stuff. It's like, well, you're not strong enough in any of your 5 major movements. So, like, sport specific stuff isn't going to be in any way helpful because you're not strong enough to do the basics right. So again, that's comes back to it, like, that basics. Even the people at the very, very top level are just doing the basics to a very, very high level, and then incorporating small bits of sport specific stuff because their athletes are in such good condition to be general athletes, rather than, like, if we looked at anyone who we had different rugby coaches, like, first of all, they have a very, very good athlete who happens to play rugby. We could probably drop those athletes in any sport, give them kind of time to adjust and get a general idea of the sport, and they're going to perform to a somewhat decent level because of just that athletic base, that athletic capacity.
That's a good point on the nutrition. That it's getting those basics right is so important. It's what the majority of people overlook. It's the anti-inflammatory smoothies, or like someone asked me the other day about, oh, should I put this type of dextrose in my recovery smoothie? And I'm like, I don't care, just once there's some carbohydrate in there. Like, he mix in a few berries, a bit of porridge. I don't mind the slightest, just some carbohydrate in that smoothie. Yeah, like little things like that.
Actually, on that, just for anyone who maybe has picked up in the latter few episodes or whatever, we do have some great chats between the three of ourselves, just looking at a lot of the basics when it comes to nutrition. Because there are so many questions about it. I know we did a bit of a myth busting kind of episode, but we also focused in big time on what those big rocks are when it comes to nutrition, and how much your routine, your daily routine, how you approach your diet in general, the impact that actually has on your fueling, your recovery, your development, and just what actual, kind of approaches really are a good way to kind of, I suppose, to take when it comes to your diet. And I know we've touched a little bit on supplements from time to time too. It's definitely worth listening back to see if all your questions are in around supplements, then why, and build up that basis to what is the role of supplements, and where and when might they be needed. So I think there's some great stuff there from some of our much earlier episodes that we did.
And just looking to a few weeks ahead there, because we try to record a week or two, sometimes even 3 in advance, and
very rarely 3 in advance.
Yeah. Well, we're recording a day in advance now. You're just thinking of editing this tomorrow. I'm like, oh, geez. But due out next week now is this was one where we really, all of us, learned a huge amount, but focusing on sleep, the benefits of sleep, how to get the highest quality sleep. And if you're looking at supplements to give you more energy or to help you feel less fatigue, then the best supplement you can have by a mile is to get more sleep. An extra hour of sleep, and I would say an extra hour of sleep before 12 o'clock, is probably one of the best things you can do to improve overall general health, mood, performance, everything. And next week's episode will give you an hour and a bit of loads of details on that.
It was just that, it kind of brings it back to the simplicity, the very basics. When we talk about diet, like all three of us, we all start off with the very basis of your diet, but it's your overall lifestyle. And like Shane mentioned, moving on to the sport-specific exercises, and that is just I often feel a good bit of maybe kind of imposter syndrome when I'm coaching at times, because I'm like, this is we're constantly hammering into the basics, whereas you can get, for me anyway, I can feel like, damn, maybe they're right. Maybe we do need to pushing it on a bit. But the best results, the biggest impact that you will have on anything from your recovery to your development, your overall performance, your health, is going to come from having a good solid base of the basics. And it's just, I think next week's episode really does highlight a lot of that.
Yeah, I think it comes, like, the most infuriating thing with that is, you're right, like sometimes you are like, these are the basics, we've covered these so many times, and if people will come up to you and they'll be like, these are like the basic things, what's next? It's like, well, you're not fucking doing the basics. You're not moving on to anything else until you do this. You might understand it, you might have heard it before, but like, you're not doing it, so you're not moving on. I was going to say, Brooke, obviously the sleep one is cool because it's something we've never done before, but is there anything you guys want to see from the podcast going forward, or any guests you have potentially lined up, or even an area for a guest to come from? You don't have to name them specifically.
Just a slight teaser. There are a couple of things we are looking at. So one, we've been not a person now, but an area or two areas we've been really trying to get people on is talk more about performance psychology. Haven't lined anyone up for that just yet, but it is an area we're looking into. We've one or two that we're about to contact, and one or two more we're trying to get contact details for. Also, something we've tried contacting a few about is performance analysis. My bias will take us towards GA, but I would be eager to get people on from various areas of various sports of performance analysis, particularly take kind of a more broad critical look at it. So hopefully between now and hopefully the end of the summer, but definitely by Christmas time, we would hope to have at least 2 on to chat about performance analysis. We have someone lined up to talk about recovery, particularly as we're about to dive into especially Club GA Championship, which I think will be good. Someone taking quite a broad overview look at coaching in general. What is coaching? What are good coaching behaviours? Some people might be able to guess what that is, but I'm not going to say it. And then just my own bias, because I'm going down that route more and more, is I'd love to get more people on to talk about some S&C in cycling, running, or endurance sports in general, because I think a huge amount of people do that. They've finished GA or team sport and they've moved into something else, or they found a greater love for it during the lockdown, just because it gives that little bit more flexibility in terms of when you train and to fit that around your own schedule. So some strategies to support that through strength training, or just even strategies in general to, like, I want to improve my 5k time. What are the 3 key sessions I need to be doing per week? like, I obviously have an idea of it, but it would mean an awful lot more from someone experienced at, coaching that over the years. They're definitely where I'd like to see us go, or they're definitely some areas I would like to see us dip into over the next 6 months or that. Damien, what about you?
I suppose for me, it's more down along maybe the health route that I'd like to see us touch in a little bit on things like, even getting into more detail, say on women's health. They're managing, their periods throughout competition, delving more into that. But a huge area that I'm interested in is both, I suppose, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and getting some people in to chat with us on that and try and get some guidance out on that, because I do know that it's quite prevalent in society as a whole, and that means it is going to be, it does exist in our sporting areas as well, and it'd be great to see or speak to some people who specialize in those areas. Things like that'd be the big thing for me. But there are a number of other areas of health that sport can have an impact on sport, or sport can have an impact on, or exercise can have an impact on, that I'd like to see us touched on. So to keep that kind of, I suppose, that other angle of our conversations kind of away from the coaching bit, but actually giving content out there for people who might be looking for a bit of guidance in those areas.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I'd love to have more people on for the recovery side of things, as John said. The other thing I'd like to have on is, it's a bit selfish actually, because obviously the other person will have to go through it, but we kind of touch on it whenever we have someone working in a multidisciplinary team. But I'd love to get someone on who's maybe had a bad experience, or like struggled to work with their team or their head coach, or like kind of butted heads with them to a degree, so they had to try and...
We don't need a guest on for that. We could definitely all share stories there.
But you know what I mean? Like, whenever we've had someone, they've been like, I've been lucky enough to have very understanding head coach, which is obviously great that there's so many out there. But I'd love to hear someone who had to overcome or had a challenge ahead of them to get their S&C time off the head coach or things like that. So a few like nightmare stories, for lack of a better word. I think we have a few guests coming up who can fill that criteria, but we won't give too much away.
To be fair, I would say nearly everyone we've had on has one of those stories. They're just always very careful not to give them, because you don't want to identify the person. You don't want to, yourself as a coach, you don't want to look bad at someone. Oh, that lad now, he gets into rows sometimes. He'll cause a bit of a stir, and you don't, just because it lowers your chances of getting future roles, maybe, that you don't want to be seen as that person, or you don't want to highlight those aspects, even though like they definitely always happen, always. I just cannot imagine a team that does not have some kind of conflict in the background. And you try and hide it from players, you try and hide it from anyone external who may be looking at all opposition teams, but like, there is no way you have an S&C, a skills coach, and whoever else may be involved all will say, oh no, I think they all need more time and I need less. Like, no one is saying that unless you're really, really lazy. But I don't see much of that, but I think people are very conscious not to give too much info away on it. Any dream guests you'd love to have on, just like straight up, if you're listening, come on, get in contact. We'll line it up next week.
Tiger Woods. You said dream guest, and you said you'd line it up.
No, he'll get in contact with us, if he's listening.
I'd love to speak with Greg Feek, and obviously that's very focused in on maybe training a very specific area of rugby, the scrum, and to be precise. But yeah, I'd love to chat with him and pick his brain on that, largely because I'm involved in training or coaching a rugby team. So it'd be great to build up my knowledge, understanding of that, and how to, translate stuff from the gym floor into the scrum development.
I'd be Stuart Lancaster. He's number one. Paul Kinnerk, Limerick curling coach. He's definitely up there. Ross Tucker down in South Africa, and you're probably not going to know who this is, but Inigo San Milan. He's the coach, kind of team doctor with the UAE cycling team, so leader of the Tour de France at the minute. He's their coach. That's his side job. His day job is a professor of molecular biology, looking at cancer and diabetes and treating all that. I'm like, how do you manage both of those? And how is coaching the greatest cyclists in the world your side job? So I'd love to just chat to him about how he manages all that.
Now I feel like I should have prepared. Then again,
Why start now?
Yeah, why start now?
If people do want to get in touch, if they have requests for people they would like us to get on, topics they'd like us to discuss, there's a few ways to get in contact. We've never really pushed this before. So we are available on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Republic. I'm actually not sure where else. They're the main ones I go looking for. You can contact us. We have social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. I think the Twitter one is followersde and the Instagram is the_followers_podcast. We have a Gmail address, just thefollowerspod@gmail.com. So you can get in contact with us on any of those. I hear loads of other podcasts say rate us on iTunes. I don't know if that's a thing, and I don't know how you do it, but if you do know, then please do it.
And tell us.
Yeah, so we can go do it ourselves every single week.
I don't think it is something you can do on Spotify. I think it's mainly an Apple podcast thing.
But if you can, I think you can follow on Spotify and subscribe on iTunes. So if you do tune in regularly, please do that, because you just get the automatic notification that it's gone up. We've been playing around with upload time, so we were for a long time Sunday morning going up, but we've changed from that now since lockdown has ended and people have gotten back to live. So we aim for Tuesday morning now. Just I'm trying to do it so that most people go train Tuesday evening. So as you're on the drive to or home from train on Tuesday evening, you can throw us on and listen. But that's just what we're playing around at the minute. So like I said, if you want to get in contact at any stage, let us know. You can message us on Twitter or Instagram, or just get in contact with any of the three of us in general.
No, I just want to say how much I've enjoyed, I suppose, this last year. And there's a great episode there. If you're looking to learn a little bit more about the three of us, we have one specific episode dedicated to Shane, and then myself and Murph are just kind of forgotten about. So that was one of the highlights for me.
Yeah, we started recording. We were going to give background on us all, but the one on Shane was just going so interesting. We were like, let's just keep this going. Now, thanks everyone who's been listening over the last year and who has shared it. There obviously have been a lot of shares and everything on social media, generally around a specific episode. Alan Dunton a few weeks ago got loads of shares. Stephen Bean a few months ago got loads of shares as well. So if there's anything in particular you liked, please share it, whether it be on Instagram, Twitter. Do people still use Facebook? Anything like that, just share and send on to a friend in a WhatsApp, whatever you like. And thanks a million everyone for listening and following, and hopefully we'll be doing another one July 2022, about 100 episodes with the man himself, Mr. Steve Fellows.
Notorious STE.